Rachel, welcome.
Thank you, Norman.
First question. You work with kids in some of the toughest situations. Can you take me back to a time or a moment when you knew without a doubt that this job and this work was something that you were like, this is what I was meant to do?
I think I have a pretty cool job because I have a lot of those moments. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of moments where you're banging your head against the wall too. I actually just had a few this week. But one of the, I think the biggest moment that sticks out to me is I was working with this kiddo, and it's so cliche. You're going to laugh at me. Um, we, this kiddo I struggled with really hard. He was a court mandated kid. He was growing up in the projects. He's adopted by a single black father, and he gave me so much pushback, like trying to get him to engage and just be there. And he actually got to be discharged from our program early, and I went with him to his last court hearing. Um, the court was saying he was doing great. We were doing a lot of relationship work with his dad. Um, and at the end we all walked out together because he was done. He was done with court. He was done with me. He was good to go. This was his last day. And he looked at me and he was like, "Thank you, Miss Rachel, for everything that you've done for me." He hugged me and we went our separate ways, and I got in my car and Graduation by Benny Blanco started playing, and it was just so it was just such a surreal moment for me where I was like, wow, like I I like to think that I made somewhat of an impact on this kiddo's life. And now, he's done with court and he gets to go back to hopefully a successful life, with no gang involvement and no um, dealing of weapons and stuff like that. It was really cool. It was a cool moment, but that's probably the biggest one that sticks out to me. Um, in my practice, we talk about success stories a lot, but that's always the one that I like to share.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% confident that kiddo was involved in gangs, but there was discussion that he was, and typically when that happens, we kind of leave that alone because we don't want to get
Yeah.
ourselves as clinicians involved in anything deeper. Um, but he did talk about dealing guns and stuff from time to time, and being able to easily access weapons, which I know is a really big issue in the community that I live in. Not necessarily the one that I live in, but the outskirts of my area. um, but yeah, he was not afraid of a challenge when it comes to confronting other people. He got into a lot of fights. He was at a very tough school. I hope he is still in school to this day. I haven't seen him since Graduation by Benny Blanco was playing. But yeah, we get a lot of those kiddos who are court mandated because they got in trouble. This kiddo, he ended up in court because of an armed robbery, which is it's so excessive to say that. When you hear the charges of a kid and what they've actually been through, it's funny how hardcore those charges sound, because I'm pretty sure he just got some guy for a dime bag of weed. And then you end up with charges like armed robbery, and
Yeah.
it seems so much more excessive than it is when and he knows like he made a poor choice. And that happens so frequently where a kid just makes a really poor choice and then it impacts the rest of their life.
Oh man, dude. I knew this episode was like gonna be uh heavy, and like as I was taking my notes, and like we'll obviously get into like more stuff here soon. But to your point, like there's so many things from our childhood where I feel
Yeah.
like if you just made one bad decision, like your life is completely 180% like turned around, right? And so
Yeah.
there's plenty of times where like, just looking back on like my own reflection, times where I was like at a party and like me, like I didn't really like party like that much or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's just like the stupid stuff we used to do, just that could
Hmm.
have ended up so bad, like kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And it's so, when I am working, it's so full circle because so many of our friends were like involved in probation and stuff. And And like when you hear that your friend is on probation, you're like, oh shit. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Okay, you're like, oh shit. Like, that person, like a probation officer, that's scary. Like, you don't want anything to do with that. You want to stay as far away as possible. And now I work very closely with probation officers at time, and I'm like, wow, these people are actually I'm on that other end now.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened in my life for it to come full circle, but it's like I'm on the other end of that now, and it's so weird because like everybody gets involved in their career for a reason. Yeah. And when I am working with these kids and like trying to get them out of trouble, I'm sorry, my dog has joined us.
He's there.
He's here.
Right?
He's here.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. Come on, buddy. So anytime I work with these kids and things are like going full circle, I'm like, man, if only you knew. Like, obviously, it's not my job as a counselor to tell these kids. I have been in your shoes before, it's just funny in my head to think about all my friends who were involved with probation, with court, and all this stuff, and just being in the shoes that I'm in now. And I like to think that that makes me more relatable, whether or not I share that information with the kids or not. But like to be able to say, I've been in your shoes before, or I know people who have been in your shoes, and let's just get through this. How can we address this? How can we get this expunged from your record? What can we do to make sure you're making more positive choices down the road? Because we're not stupid. You're a kid. You're going to do stuff. You're going to try stuff. You're going to push the envelope. It's your child. That's literally your job to do that as a child. But how can we do that safely? How can we do it in a realistic manner where you're not going to have a felony on your record for the rest of your life?
So you actually hit on something that I was going to ask that I think is like super important. So relatability, right? We have just super quick like story on for the sake of the audience, I guess you could call it. So we have a organization called the POTIF. I don't remember exactly what it stands for. Are you familiar with the POTIF like system? Or
I've heard of it before, but
okay.
I'm not familiar.
I don't remember what it stands for, and I'm sure like people are going to be yelling at me for not knowing. But it's basically a I hate to just say therapists because like I feel like they play a lot more role. I feel like therapists in general play a lot more roles than just like being a therapist, right? You're a friend, you're a counselor, you're a safe space, like you're doing all these things. But we would come back from deployments, and it was really hard initially because they didn't have security clearances, right? And so it was always difficult to try to express a story or like a thing that you've seen, but then you have to constantly check yourself of like, oh well, like I can't disclose this information to her or him because it's classified and like I'll get in trouble if I discuss this. But once they start getting security clearances, that like completely opened up an entire like different aspect of us being able to like express ourselves, right? And then on top of that, the one that we got was from Compton. And so like we would talk about, unfortunately like part of the job you have to like take people's lives sometimes, right? And so we would talk about that, and she would just sit there. She was like 5'6", like, white hair. And she would just be like, she looked like she was from the Golden Girls, and she would just be like, oh yeah, I know all about stacking bodies. Like and we're just like, yo, dude, like you're sick, And so
yeah,
she like easily rose to being one of the best POTIFs that I think my organization like had, simply because one, she had a security clearance, and then two, she was so relatable, like it was so easy to talk to her. She wasn't just like writing with a pen, like doing the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And so long story, but how have you seen that kind of like affect the relationship with the kids?
I feel like I have a really easy time, knock on wood, making a connection with most of my kids. I struggle with the younger ones because that is just, they're younger, they don't know how to express things, but I feel like I'm still close enough in age to like the older teenagers where I'm like, it's just so much easier to connect with them because I'm like, I know where you're at right now. Life sucks. Being a kid, life sucks. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know who your friends are. The friends that you do have, they're horrible half the time. Kids are talking negatively about you. And just being able to like relate to them, I think is so important to build that relationship. And I think I'm just it's easy for me to do that because I feel like I think I want to be somebody that my younger self could have turned to at some point, and just being able to relate to those kids is like the biggest piece of that, I feel like, and just building that relationship. Um and having that mutual connection. Being a counselor is really hard. Like, looking for a counselor, it's hard to find somebody who has that connection because you don't know what they've been through, that you don't know their history. Like with a lot of drug and alcohol treatment, a lot of people want somebody who's been through that. They want somebody who has been through addictions before. um and I think it's similar in all other realms of treatment too. Same thing with you, like being able to talk to somebody who's been through something like that. It's so much easier to talk to somebody who you
Yeah,
have something that you can relate to
absolutely.
versus just like rambling to somebody who knows nothing about the cause. Of course, like, we can try, but that's the best I can do. I'm not, if I haven't been through something similar to you, I can't put myself in your shoes. I can try, I can empathize with you, I can do what I need to do as a clinician, and be there with you and sit with those feelings. But being having some type of trauma and working with kids who have trauma is probably the number one thing I have going for me, I guess.
No, that's cool. Okay, we're at a pretty good spot to talk about how you ended up doing the like population that you're doing, if that makes sense.
So I was never a good student. High school was not my forte. I didn't like studying. I didn't care what kind of grades I got. And then I got to college, and it wasn't much of a difference. I wasn't taking things seriously. And then I met my best friend, Haley, and she basically taught me how to be a student. None of this is really relevant, truthfully, but so I had 5 years of undergrad because I dicked around. I thought I wanted to be a nurse, but then that didn't pan out. So, which thankfully, um, especially during the pandemic that we just
Oh,
got through, I
dude,
couldn't
yeah.
imagine. But anyways, so 5 years of undergrad and then 3 years of grad school. I went to Kent State University. It was a I think they had to have a little bit of a longer program, from what I understand. You can get your master's in counseling in 2 years from other schools, is what I
Really?
understand.
Wow.
Yeah. So I pretty much went to school long enough to be a doctor, so that's cool. Because I don't make the type of money that a doctor makes. But that is mostly my fault. So here we are. Counseling just made more sense for me because of what I've been through in my childhood. I had a wee bit of an estranged relationship with my dad for quite a while. We're doing a lot better now. Um, but I mean, it's not that I had like bad friends in high school. We were obviously doing things that high schoolers do, but
Dude,
that
relatability, right?
it
You're like,
is. It
oh, I
is. It
do
goes back to the
that.
relatability. Yeah, yeah. I don't now. Well, to a certain extent, but
That's funny.
I used to when I was younger. That's, we all try these things, and that's what I was doing in high school, and that's what my friends around me were doing. And um I never got in legal trouble, thankfully, but a lot of my friends did. I saw a lot of them go through probation and stuff, and then I fumbled with nursing, and I ended up going for my bachelor's in psychology, and I found counseling. I had been through counseling when I was younger because of the relationship that I had with my dad. My dad made sure that I was in counseling because of that. And the thing that really stuck with me is how much of an impact that counselor made on me. I've looked her up since then, and she was actually a social worker, but nonetheless, she did the same thing that I do. Um, and you don't realize how much of an impact those people make in your life until they're gone and way down the road doing something else with somebody else.
Absolutely.
Um, she really helped me learn who I am as a person and how I can address confrontation in my life without hating everybody. Um, because of my relationship with my dad, I took a lot of stuff out on my mom, and I was not a nice kid to her. Um, our relationship too has improved since then. She's my best friend now, but talking to a counselor helps you get through those types of things. It helps you just learn more about yourself and how to handle things. And I think if I was in counseling a lot younger, I would have probably made some much better decisions with my life. Um, but I think I'm a counselor now because I want to do that for my kids. Um, and I think I want to work with kids because of the time frame that she was able to come into my life and
Yeah.
help me fix things. I think I was in counseling, I don't know, maybe sophomore and junior, senior year or something like that. It was maybe like a year or two, but it was still enough to make a really big impact with my life and get me to learn how to treat people better and to treat myself better. And I think because of that time frame, that's why I want to work with kids now. Yeah, I think that's it.
Dude,
I
that's
need to
cool.
start going to counseling too to figure these things out, but
Your day to day. So you want to be a nurse. Thankfully, you
yeah.
didn't during a time where
Yeah.
nurses were, yeah, needed a lot. So you wanted to be a nurse. You were like, hey, don't love that. You found psychology. Your life experiences leading up to you making that decision, you were like, this is what I should be doing. Like, this is what interests me, and
Yeah.
this is the impact that I want to have on these people, right?
Yeah.
You graduate, amazing feeling. Day one, you enter the job. Up until now, like, what's a typical, I hate to say day to day because I understand with a job like yours, like, you're kind of mentoring, and so there is no
Mhm.
typical day to day. But like, if you could
Mhm.
think back on a week at least, and be like, this was a long week. Like, what does that look like? And I'm sure there's a lot of those.
Oh, there are so many long weeks. So I am not like a traditional counselor. I don't sit in an office and have people come to me. I work with kiddos who are at risk for out of home placement. Um, and the program that I work in is called home based therapy or intensive home based therapy or integrated co occurring treatment. So, all those fancy words, they basically mean that I go to your house and see you several times per
Okay.
week. And yeah, so there's certain guidelines and criteria that we have to get into, but it's an Ohio thing and nobody really cares about that too much unless they're in the program. So, um, my weekly schedule is kind of cool, especially in the summer, because I get to go to these people's homes, which some people are probably a little freaked out about. Um, but it's not that bad most of the time. Of course, you do have the homes that you dread going into, but more times than not, you have the homes that are safe and you're just in somebody's home, you know. Um, but I get to take my kids to the mall. I get to take my kids to the park. I get to take them to their psychiatry appointments. I get to be a lot more personal with my clients than a traditional counselor gets to be. With that being said, I just got through a tough week with one of my kids because a 7-year-old beat me up, you know. And with that being, it's a 7-year-old. Okay, he's the first kid who's ever tried beating me up. But like with that being said, it's like when he punches me, it's like a rubber duck
Yeah.
hitting me. You know, it's nothing like I didn't get beat up today or this week. But there are some weeks that are harder than others. Like there's a lot of things as a counselor that a lot of people can imagine that you go through. Things happen with your clients, things happen with yourself personally. Um, but there's a lot of times where you're just I only work Monday through Thursday. I traditionally only see clients Monday through Thursday. And by the time Thursday at 6 p.m. rolls around, I'm like, thank God this week is over. And I get to just go home and not talk to children, And I mean, I guess not talk to children, but like not have to talk to my clients, that I can just check out and not be present with somebody other than myself. So I like my weekly schedule. I like that you take one client at a time, and that can look like different things. It can be a 45-minute session, or it can be a 2.5-hour session. Being that I have this flexibility with my role, I can just pretty much do what I want. I can schedule them when I need to. Again, following those guidelines that I need to. But my weeks aren't always horrible. I have good weeks and I have bad weeks, just like everybody else with their jobs, but oftentimes I do run into a kid who I'm like, oh, God, I can't wait for this. I can't wait for this hour-long session to be over, and you're like checking your
Oh yeah,
watch and you're like, let's go.
it's you again.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think every job has that. It's just in different regards.
Dude, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are going to understand too just the how much of a toll being in a position like yours has on a person. So in the military, we have a role called the first sergeant, which
Mhm.
the first, are you familiar with like that term or like role or anything?
No,
Yeah.
I wish I was.
So the first sergeant, it's funny because without getting into like the history or anything like that, the role has now turned into essentially being like the counselor for a large group of people, sometimes upwards to
Okay.
like 200 to 300 people, right? And so yeah,
Oh
it's
my.
ridiculous. And it's not like there's multiple first sergeants per unit. Now, if
Mhm.
you're lucky, you're the first sergeant of like 30 people and that's it. But anytime
Mhm.
someone gets a DUI, you're there. Anytime there's a
Yeah.
domestic violence like claim or charge or anything, you're there. And
Yeah.
that's obviously the sad and I hate to call it evil, but like that's the unfortunate part of the job. But then there's the nice part of the job of like anytime there's a promotion, you're there. Anytime, there's a graduation, you're also there, right? So they have to play this
Yeah.
role and that job, they only let those people do for I think at most 3 to maybe 4 years if you're lucky, just because of the
Yeah.
strain that it puts on a person.
Good boy, huh? He's a good boy. Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
this is a perfect transition. Dealing with other people's problems, specifically as it relates to mental health,
Mhm.
how, what lessons has that really taught you about dealing with your mental health? Because I think there's one thing to know a subject, and then there's a completely different side of things when you have to teach that subject, and it kind of
Yeah.
refines like your own daily processes. Have you felt that way, just kind of
Mhm.
like in the mental health space?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's so many things, like as a counselor, when you're working on something with somebody, you're like, damn, I should write that down and take my own advice. um, but too, like, there. The thing about counseling is, or I guess working in the mental health field, not even necessarily counseling, but working in the mental health field, there's a lot of stuff that you find out that you need to be working on yourself. Um, and it's funny because I'm sure every career is like this, but like when you find those Instagram or Facebook pages where it's like parody accounts of what you do, and it's like
Yeah.
when you read one of those memes or whatever, and it's like, man, I should be taking my own advice. I should be taking my ass to counseling. I should be doing all these things. It's so realistic because you'll be sitting there with a kid and they're talking about a behavior, and you're like, oh my God, I do that too. Like, let's talk through this. What are some things that we can develop to help you? Let's talk through your trauma. This is a response because you have been through X, Y, and Z. Um, and it's so easy to do that to yourself too. And realistically, all of us should be in counseling. We should all be working on ourselves. We should all be putting forth that effort. But who does that? I mean, kids, I work with kids because their parents are making them go to counseling, or their probation officer is making them go to counseling. When you're holding yourself accountable, it's a whole different ballpark, you know, like there's so many things that we know that we should be working on. But if you let that consume yourself, like if you focus on those things that you should be working on all the time, who are you? If you are constantly focusing on these things that need to be addressed, what are you really passionate about? Like what I don't it's almost like if you let I like myself. I think I'm a good person. I think I have positive attributes, but at the same time I'm not perfect. There's definitely things that I could be working on. There's things that need to be addressed. But if I constantly let those things consume me, you will never like who you are. And I think to be a normal person, you have to be content with yourself to a certain extent. Um, and good for these parents for putting their kids in counseling. It's, they're keeping my lights on, you know, like I have a job because of these people. And obviously it's something that I don't think I will ever run into the issue with my career that like, oh, your job is being replaced with robots and stuff like that. But there's always things that we could be working on. And if we continue to let those things consume us, we will never like who we are. So I think at a certain moment, at a certain point in your life, you learn, yeah, I don't like those things. I could address those things. I know I need to work on those things. And a counselor is really helpful to do that with. But at some point, you have to accept that those things are who you are. And yeah, I might be really bad with confrontation in my relationships. And yeah, that's definitely something that I need to work on. But is it this horrible thing about me? Is it this thing that is so debilitating and so improper that needs to be a constant focus on what I am or who I am as a person, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that addresses that. I'm not sure if I worded that properly, but I think we all have things that we want to work on and that we want to address. Um, and I guess I'm just going to reiterate what I said. A counselor can be super helpful with doing that, but it's not always necessary. And now my dog's crying.
Dude, I literally wrote down, I don't know if you can even see this. I wrote down 56. So I take notes very weird, but they mean something to me, right? I wrote down 56 thumbnail because not only were you clearly passionate about what you were talking about, it hit home to one of like my core values. And on top of that, like what you said was just so phenomenal. Like, you know, when you see like a podcast on like YouTube Shorts or like Instagram or something like that, and you're just like, oh my god, like wow, that was really insightful. And then it drives you to like the podcast episode, and you like watch that. I've been doing my research, I've been like, what does that look like for my podcast? And you just gave me like the most phenomenal example, I think, that like I don't have to edit any of what you just said, you know? And I think it's most important that it just like comes from the heart as well. So I love that. I thought that was phenomenal. And I know people
Thank you.
listening are going to think that's phenomenal as well. So the following questions, um, you said a few things that like piqued my interest on that one, but the more glaring one is, what do you think social media like plays a role in people's perception of themselves, kind of to everything you just said realistically? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question because excuse me, I feel like I'm guilty of this. I know everybody else who has social media is probably guilty of this, where we see something online and we let it shape a perspective of something that we know. You know, like old people are notorious for this. Like I think about my mom and when she's like, "Oh, did you see on Facebook that something happened? I can't believe that really happened." And you're like, "Okay, you don't need to believe everything on the internet." But it's so, I mean, take that and just shrink it down because starting in childhood, we learn our perspectives, our values, all of that based off of what our parents tell us. But now, children today are learning it based off of what their parents tell them, what they learn at school, obviously, and what they see online. And that, the internet is a weird thing because it's so cool that we have answers at the touch of our fingertips, but it's also so problematic because we see every opinion that there is to see, and we're not meant for that. It is so, social media shapes us in ways that is not normal. um and again, we're all guilty of it, where you see something online, especially like with the election and stuff that just happened, you are reading stuff about each side and you're like, I don't know what to
Mm-hmm.
believe. I don't know what's right and what's wrong. Either that, or you see something and you take it and you run with it, and that's not always accurate. What we see online isn't always the truth. It's not always realistic, but it's so easy to just want to believe something. And like with TikTok and stuff, people have the ability to make these short videos where it's just like, hey, this is what's going on, this is why it's problematic, and this is why you should believe me. And it sounds right,
Yeah.
like it sounds like something that I should believe, and it's not always the case. And but it's so easy to just fall into that trap because that's society. That's just what the norm is. Like, it's just, you see something online and it's educational, so you should believe it. Like, and it's problematic because it's making us believe these things that aren't true to a massive
Yeah.
scale. um but it's just, that's just the way our society is. That's the direction that we're going into. I have social media. I'm not going to get rid of mine just because of this belief I have that it's it's somewhat toxic. I go home at night, and when I don't want to talk to anybody anymore, I just scroll on TikTok and I watch these stupid videos. I watch cooking videos, I watch opinion videos, I watch all kinds of stuff. Um, and sometimes it is true. Sometimes the information that they're providing you is factual. But that's not always the case. And I think as adults, we have the piece in our brain developed where it's like, yeah, I should reconsider that to be factual information. I should fact check before I share this information with people. I should do my due diligence. Um, but kids don't have that piece developed quite yet. I don't know when. I'm not a scientist. I don't know when that stuff is fully developed in your brain. Probably not until your late 20s or mid 20s, but kids don't have that piece yet. And so that's why social media is so problematic for them, because they're just putting stuff out there that they don't know how it can affect them, or they're believing stuff that is shaping them into these people who one day will be running our society. And they learned the information on Facebook one day. And it's just, sometimes it's a scary thought, sometimes it's daunting, but social media is, the internet is a cool thing. It's nice to have. I like to stay connected with my friends out of state and other people in my life. Um, but it's problematic. And so I think, like, as parents, the best thing that we can do, or like the people that I work with, like when I work with the parents in my families and stuff, we have to, social media oftentimes has to be a conversation. Like,
Yeah.
what can we do to monetize these things to make sure that what your kid is consuming is appropriate? Because they don't develop that piece until much later, where they understand that it is problematic, or it's not always accurate, you know? But that's just something that we're going to have to adapt to because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the piece that it's not going anywhere. I read an article, I want to say 4 or 5 months ago, that was kind of talking about how the general public in the United States, they don't trust the things on TV anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as like politics and news and all this other stuff, named uh, like news broadcaster or whatever, and I try to like stay away from like oh well, CNN said it and like all this other stuff because I personally
Yeah.
like I don't even pay attention to that kind of stuff. But what I thought was interesting from the article was the fact that people who are voting now, right? So like our generation, they would rather get their news from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, because that's what they trust rather than like some random person in a suit on TV talking about whatever that they're talking
Yeah.
about. And I think it's interesting to think about like what that is eventually going to evolve into, where
Hmm.
we may even see a reality, at least in our lifetime, where like a presidential debate may be on a podcast rather than like on TV, which I think is a wild concept to even think of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, we were here for that shift, but it's like all of a sudden, nobody's watching the news. We don't watch the
Yeah,
news. And if you do, like, how many people our age are you that they go home and turn on the news at
exactly.
night?
Yeah.
You're like, you're weird. You're abnormal, you
There's
know?
gonna be like three or four
Versus
people.
us, like,
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah,
Go ahead.
right. No, you're good. And like even the newspaper, like nobody does that anymore. That's not a thing. Um, but with that being said, there's so many like issues that follow that because at least that person on the news, it's one person. They have the power to be monetized because they're run by a
Yep.
network. You know, that's like one thing, and it's manageable versus all of these hundreds of thousands of millions of whatever people posting their opinions on social media and like an opinion is an opinion,
Yeah.
like you are more than entitled to have that, but the fact that you are saying something, it's going to get skewed, somebody else has to comment on it, somebody else is reading it, they're absorbing it, it's like the news times 1,000, you know. It's not like it's just an interesting concept to think about. I mean, there's nothing that we can do except obviously address it with the parents, like how can we consume this safely.
Absolutely.
um but like even for ourselves, like you read something and sometimes you have to like reread it and understand to yourself, like, is this factual information, is this something that I should be listening to or hearing or addressing and incorporating into my life. It's just, I don't know, it's just a weird
Yeah, it's weird.
concept to think about.
So if and instead of asking you a question here, I'll just give you a scenario, I guess. If whether it's for me or let's say I have a 12-year-old, right? Now, I'll use a 12-year-old for the example, but if I have a kid come to me and say like, "Hey, like I have a phone, I got an iPhone or whatever, and a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing on Facebook is like I'm getting bullied and I don't really know why and I don't know how to stop it because there's so many people, right? As as a parent or a friend, like if this is my neighbor or something like that, like what can I do really in that situation? Cuz I feel like the easy logical and unemotional thing to do is like, "Oh, well just turn your phone off." Like just stop looking at it, right? But
Yeah.
you and I both know, and the people listening to this understand that it is way more nuanced than that. So, are there
Hmm.
any things that I can like add to my toolkit to kind of help someone in that situation?
I think just hearing the kid out, because like you said, the logical thing to do is turn your phone off, get rid of your social media, do whatever, but that's not the case for everybody. So many people stay connected with social media, so like just listening to them and hearing what the problem is would be a really good start. And how can we address that? Like, what are some things that we can incorporate and initiate into your life that will address this issue? Are there certain people that we can block? As a parent, are there certain kids that we can speak to understand why this is happening? Like, say it's so situational, but like, say your kids is your kid is being bullied by their the parents friend's kid, like who can we speak to? Like, are there
Yeah,
people in the community that we can talk to and address this with? um Do I need to get the school involved? How problematic is it? Bullying's going to happen. Bullying to a certain extent, like, obviously it's not a good thing, but it's going to happen. And how much of it is tolerable, I suppose? Like, how much of it can you accept until it's becoming an issue? Um, sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah.
um, and what about this can we do? Can we do to get rid of a certain form of social media? Is this happening on Instagram? Is it happening on Snapchat? Parental controls. There's a lot that we can do without fully getting involved. A lot of therapy is about autonomy. So, what are you as a kid comfortable doing?
Yeah.
How do you want to address this? Because obviously, our goal as parents is to make sure that this kid's not being bullied, or I guess not even as parents, but as adults. Is our responsibility to make sure that this kid is safe. So what is the kid comfortable with? If we do get the school involved, what are they comfortable with the school doing? Does this kid who is doing the bullying, do they need to be addressed and spoken to? There's just nothing is black and white. Everything is so
Absolutely.
situational, but it's like giving that child autonomy and like letting them be comfortable with the choices that are being made to address this issue are that's a big piece of it, because if they don't feel comfortable addressing certain things, then they're not going to do it. They're like, you can tell them to delete Facebook all you want, but they're not going to do it. So it's just, but also with a grain of salt, is that kid being bullied so bad that they want to take their life? Yeah, we're going to have to get the school involved. We're going to have to delete social media. I don't know. It's situational.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as you like brought up a lot of the scenarios, that just reminds people like how delicate a lot of these situations are. Now,
Mm-hmm.
for someone like me, I'm an extremely logical conversationalist, I guess you could call it. I'm a very emotional person. Um, but when I have conversation, it's very like, well, let's talk about this chronologically, and if we get to a certain point in the conversation that I don't really understand how we got there, I will like stop the conversation and be like, how did we get here kind of thing. So
Uh-huh.
with that, when it comes to having this conversation with, again, we could use the 12-year-old for example, or we could just talk about like with a friend kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I hear about asking good questions, or like to be a good friend, part of that is to like ask good questions, right? Of like, okay, well, what are you feeling right now? Like, what is causing you to feel this way, right? And so we go back to the
Mm-hmm.
example that you gave of like ensuring that the child feels safe. Is This is the logical part of my brain that's like, what's a good question to ask them,
Yeah.
But like with all of the nuance, are there a few things that I guess we should all be thinking about when approaching that conversation? Because I know no one question is the best question, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I think just ensuring the kids' safety and giving them a space to process those things is what's most important. So obviously if the kid is coming to you, they feel safe to a certain extent to address this issue with you. And how can you maintain that? So what are the things that you are comfortable with incorporating to make sure that we keep you safe, that you're comfortable
Yeah,
doing? And so asking those questions is really important, but that comes from listening to what they have to say. So using those, it's so corny, but using those active listening skills is what, that's how you get to ask those questions, because hearing out what that kid has to say and about what they want to do to address the problem, or just how they feel about
absolutely.
it, is how you are going to get to those answers.
Dude, active listening, I'm sure there's husbands everywhere that are like, my wife tells me that all the time. Like, what,
Uh-huh.
from your shoes and your perspective, what does active listening like sound, or what does that look like to you?
It's so funny when you talk about it in the perspective of a relationship because we all do it where we make those passive aggressive comments or like whatever. This morning I literally said I looked at my dog and I said, "Oh, did nobody let you out this morning?" It's just those like passive aggressive things. And I think when you think about it on both ends of the spectrum, you've got partner A and you've got partner B. Partner B is making the comment about letting the dog out, and you've got partner A who's not doing it. But it is partner B's responsibility to speak up and to say those things instead of like a passive aggressive way. Um and active listening in a relationship is tricky because when are you actively listening? When are those points in your relationship that you're supposed to be doing those things? Obviously, most of the time. I mean, like, you want to think that, yeah, you're supposed to listen to that person most of the time, but like, how often are you guys just having like small talk?
Yeah.
Like, it's normal in our relationships to just like, oh, let's talk about our day. Let's talk about what we're having for dinner, those types of things. Um, and so it's like, when are you supposed to be using those active listening skills to make sure your partner feels validated? And obviously, again, it's situational. But I think in those moments when your partner sits you down and says we need to have a chat, obviously that's the big one. But whenever you are using feeling words, I think is probably the most important point to be using those skills. So when you notice your 12-year-old comes up to you saying something's going on and being bullied, or when your partner comes up to you and says, if you don't start letting the dog out, I'm going to be very frustrated with
Got
you.
it.
But when you start hearing those feeling words is when you should take a second to yourself and be like, okay, I need to be listening to this person. They're trying to explain to me how they're feeling, and what can I do outside of listening to make sure that my person is okay, make sure that my person feels validated, and that this thing that they're talking about, I can address it and fix it.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. Yeah. And if I'm a person that doesn't know how to do that right, you're you're kind of alluding earlier, at least, like counseling and going to some kind of counselor to discuss those concepts is like where I could learn that skill of like, I don't really know what I feel, which is making me frustrated, which is making the situation
Yes.
worse. Okay. Yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal, like,
Yeah.
advice. Okay.
Also,
Yeah.
in relationships, your partner is supposed to be your person. That's the person that you're supposed to lean on. And 9 times out of 10, they might not have the answers, but they should be able to help you and guide you into the direction that you two want to be headed in. I mean, if I want you to let the dog out more, I have an idea of what that looks like in my head as
Hmm.
partner B. And you as partner A, you probably have an idea too. So, like, what can we do? How can we put those two ideas together? And if you don't, let's have a discussion and talk about ways that we can try to address this issue.
Absolutely. Dude, as a big takeaway. So we talked about a lot of stuff. If you could pick one thing that you've learned just over your years of life as far as taking care of yourself, because I think there was a common theme, while not explicitly stated, that is a common theme throughout this entire thing, right? Like, it's very difficult
Mm-hmm.
for you to show up for these other people, for your
Yeah.
kids, for the relationship stuff that we've talked about, for my audience, like whether they're in an aircraft or like driving to work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The overall theme is taking care of yourself in some capacity mentally as well. If you could
Yeah.
recommend like one strategy, what would that be?
Mm-hmm. When you sent me my questions and I read this, I liked this question because I don't have an answer for it. But by that I mean that there is not one
Yep.
thing that is going to fit everybody's tool belt. There's not one thing that I can give you that is just it's going to make things easier for you. Um, Self-care looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. My form of self-care is Monday through Thursday coming home and reading. for 20 minutes before I go to bed. But there's somebody else, maybe my neighbor, hates reading, so that just doesn't work for them. Um, Exercising, realistically, that's something that we should all be doing, but that's not the case. There's something. I urge people when we talk about self care to find something that makes you happy and that you enjoy doing without being able to put too much effort into it. And reading is my thing. Making sure I can come home and eat dinner before I go to bed is my thing. Making sure my everything is done by the end of the night, so that way when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to make sure my documentation isn't complete, and then I'm scrambling to get that done. Um, Making sure the kitchen needs clean, stuff like that. Self care is what you need it to be. I like to get my nails done. That's my form of self care, and it's stupid, but it's what I like to
Yeah.
do. Um, and I think making sure that you take care of yourself in a way that's maintainable and something that brings you some sort of joy. I talk about this topic a lot with my parents, like with my clients' parents. And excuse me, oftentimes it's a nap, taking a nap halfway through the day. Um, Getting in your car and driving away from your child for 20 minutes. And I don't mean like leaving your kid in the middle of the street type of driving away. I mean like making sure your kid is
Leave
safe.
them at the park, go for a little drive, come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drive to the liquor store, those types of things. Um, but something that is within reason that you can do that is manageable on a daily basis that brings you some type of joy. um, when I read this question, I too thought about coping skills, and when I hear, I don't know if it's just me, but when I hear the word coping skills, it's stupid. You're like, that is just, who's going to do deep breathing when they're on a level 10? Who is going to be doing these things to take care of themselves when it's just not practical? And like, the counseling side of me is, oh, practice those things when you are not on a level 10, so it makes it easier, so that when you are on a 10, you can incorporate them. But it's that takes wisdom, it takes knowledge, it takes years of practice, and it's not always appropriate. It's not. um Me as a 30-year-old female, when I'm pissed off, I'm not doing deep breathing. I'm raging around the house. I'm yelling at people. I'm stress cleaning, whatever it is. So finding those things that brings you some type of joy, even if it's a small amount, is our form of self-care. And whatever that looks like to you is what you need to be doing on a regular basis to make sure that you take care of yourself. Monday through Thursday, I don't have a lot of time for self-care. That's why reading is the thing that makes me happy. It's what I do. Um, or laying in the bed. I like to be horizontal, and that makes me happy. So if that is what does it for you, if that's the thing, then do it. I urge you to do it, because those things, no matter how stupid, no matter how much your husband nags about you going to get your hair and your nails done or whatever it is, if it makes you happy, that is your form of self-care, and that is the thing that you need to continue to be doing in order to take care of yourself. And that's in all realms of life. That doesn't matter if we have a high stress job. It doesn't matter if you're a stay-at-home mom. These are the things that you should be doing. My boyfriend's an accountant. He does things that he does
Mhm.
like to take care of himself during this time because he's really busy right now. And so it just, self-care looks like different things for different people. And once you find out what that thing is that brings you some sense of happiness for short periods of time, do it and don't stop doing it until you get sick of it, and then find something else.
Dude, that's awesome. I have an obscene amount of hobbies, and
Uh-huh.
I think that is eh, not having like written it down and like dissected like what you just said. I am starting to realize like as you were talking, like that is my form of self care. Like
Yeah.
I do jujitsu. I now have this podcast. Like I love playing video games, and so like
Mm-hmm.
there's so many things, but I don't do any of those things every single day. Like maybe video
Right.
games. I try to do like at least like 20 minutes just so I can like connect with my like friend group, like doing that or whatever.
Yeah.
but I'm now looking back at like what a typical week of mine is. Like one of my buddies just made fun of me because I have a skateboard, and he's like, "Dude, you don't know how to skateboard." And I'm like, "Yeah, but there's something about like getting on a board and just like pushing and like going down the street where
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I like this feeling, you know."
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's really cool. I do have one last question, and then we're completely done. So
Okay.
I think I may do this as like a sub segment or like a segment four to like completely close out. And if it
Mm-hmm.
sucks and it stinks, I think the last question that you just answered, I think that's a phenomenal way to like close the episode out. It felt like a closer. Yep. Um, for the episode, which I thought was cool. But I also think it's really important to ask people like what is currently on their mind right now. And so like regardless of the time frame, like what have you been thinking about recently?
Oh. I think for me, I am thinking about summer. I'm thinking about brighter days. I'm thinking about warmer days. I'm thinking about how I can get through the next 4 months with this 7-year-old who beat me up earlier this
Yeah.
week. You know, just vacations and happy times, and not that like I'm a genuinely happy person. Like I present as a happier person. I feel like I'm rather positive. But just here in Ohio, it's gloomy. It's
Mm,
gross out. It snowed today after we just got rid of a bunch of snow, and it's like it's just gloomy. I'm ready to start being able to take my dog on walks. Don't tell him I said that because he'll freak out. But
WALK.
yeah, without his entire belly being covered in mud and water. Like I want to be able to go outside without having like I can just slide my flip-flops on and go and just get some vitamin D and enjoy some warm weather. I think that's like the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and what can I do to get through these next few months to be able to enjoy that period of my life. I think that's my answer. I like that question though.
Yeah,
I know my answer wasn't elaborate, it wasn't exciting, it was not focused on mental health, but I think that's where I'm at. I think that's my
that's
answer.
cool. Yeah, and that gives a lot of context too,
Yeah.
because I sent you that text where I was like, "Oh, it's so cold here," and you're like, "Yeah, dude."
Yeah.
You're like, "I don't want to hear that
I
at all."
don't even
But yeah,
yeah.
dude, we got snow. I think like 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago or something like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Like it was insane. We got like 6 or 7 inches of snow, and that was in my
Oh my
living room. Yeah, dude,
gosh.
it was insane. It was and I walked outside. It was so cold that I mean I've been having like truck issues like recently. Knock on wood, I think it's over.
Mm,
But um,
good.
I was I had to like go outside, and part of my truck had legitimately like frozen over, and it snapped one of the pieces. Yeah, simply because it was like that cold, and
Wow.
like I think vehicles are used to any kind of weather, right? But like I've been living in Florida for 8.5 years. Like I've been there for a while.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
it was just like shocking, and
Yeah.
all the stores closed down. Like the roads, the police were like, "Yo, if you get on the road, like we will not be there to stop you." Like, um,
Yeah.
but good luck.
Good
Yeah,
luck.
exactly.
You're on your
Yeah.
own.
So it was insane, but yeah, I'm
Yeah.
I'm unsure if I want to put that question in the beginning. Um, but so far I'm liking it at the end. I say so far that you're the first person like I asked that
Yeah.
question to. But I liked how like we just got done talking about this topic for an hour and 40 minutes,
Uh-huh.
and then I'm just like, cool. So like, what have you been thinking about? And you're just like, I have to
Yeah.
think about this.
You do.
Yeah.
It's like what is like a repetitive thought that I've had lately. I like that.
I'll keep it.
I like it at the end,
Yes.
I think. Cuz it's just like oh, we've been so focused on like mental health, like that's been the topic obviously. And then it's like, well, what have you been thinking about lately? Well, first of all, it's always my dog. He's the only thing that I think about constantly, but like outside of that, like where's your head been lately? I like it.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, that's
I
cool.
don't have anything else. I think when I click stop recording, you have to stay. I have to hold you hostage basically until it finishes like uploading like the whole thing.
Okay.
This
Mm-hmm.
program I think is really cool because it like uploads like as we talk. But
As you
yeah,
go.
but what
Yeah.
it'll do is like I'll have my own video file, I have my own audio file, and then you'll have your own of both, right? And so what's cool about that
Okay.
is like, as I'm sitting here like petting my dog, like talking to you, like normal conversation, like you won't hear or see any of that when I go into the editor, right? And so like your
Okay.
coughs and all the other stuff that you were talking about, like
Mm-hmm.
we won't see any of that. And yeah, so it's just really cool, but it
Yeah.
should be quick. And so I'll actually click the end now. Do you have anything else for the audience? As if I have an
I
audience.
don't think
Do you have
so.
anything else for my mom that's not going to listen to this whole thing?
You, me, and your mom. Not that I can think of. I hope everybody has a good rest of their day, and they took away something from this, all three of us.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's going to be like 4 people probably. It's going to be my friend group, and they're only going to listen to the whole thing because they're also getting interviewed. So, um,
They're like, "What is this going to be
yeah,
like?"
exactly, exactly. Um, yeah, so I'll upload. I'll click end. I don't know if that worked. It did. It's stopping.